In the ancient, mist-wrapped kingdom of Alaris, the very word magic was enough to summon terror. The royal decree was carved in iron and blood. All magic is heresy. All who wield it must perish. Years ago, the realm had been nearly destroyed by sorcerers who sought to bend nature to their will. The aftermath left cities in ruins, and the people scarred by fear. Since then, the mere hint of enchantment could send a crowd into hysteria. To be born with power was to be cursed, hunted, hated, and condemned before even being understood. And in the quiet outskirts of this fearful land lived Selene, a young woman with stormlight in her veins. Her hair caught the light like strands of moonfire, and her eyes shimmered with a faint silver hue, the mark of those once called the Blessed, but now known as the Damned. Since childhood, she had known she was different. When she cried, candles flickered out. When she touched a dying bird, its heart began to beat again. But her mother, a healer who once served the royal court, had pulled her close, trembling, and whispered, "You must never show them, my love. The king hunts those like you. Promise me, Selene. Hide your gift or you'll be taken." Selene had promised. And for years she kept that vow like a chain around her soul. She buried her light beneath layers of fear and silence. By day, she worked as an apprentice in the village apothecary, quiet, obedient, unnoticed. By night, however, her secret life began. When the world slept and the forest glowed faintly under the moon's gaze, Selene would wander into the woods barefoot. There, surrounded by whispering trees and silver streams, she let herself breathe freely. She would stretch out her hands, and the air around her would hum with power. Leaves shimmered, stars pulsed brighter, and the gentle warmth of her magic filled the darkness with light. It was beautiful. It was dangerous. Every time she did it, she told herself it would be the last. But her magic wanted to live. And deep down, so did she. What she didn't know was that in the shadows beyond the trees, unseen eyes watched her. Eyes belonging to someone who knew the cost of forbidden power and the value of possessing it. That night, as the wind carried whispers through the branches, Selene's fate quietly began to change. Selene's eyes were her greatest curse, and her greatest secret. No matter how tightly she tried to hold herself together, emotion always betrayed her. When anger flared, her eyes burned like molten silver. When sadness gripped her heart, they shimmered softly like moonlight on water. It was a mark that could damn her to the gallows. The sign of the old blood, an ancient lineage said to descend from the first magic born who once shaped the stars. In Alaris, such a mark was more than a stain. It was a death sentence. The king's inquisitors scoured the lands for anyone bearing signs of enchantment, glowing eyes, unaging skin, or whispers that followed them in the dark. They dragged the accused into the city square, binding them in chains etched with runes that burned against their flesh. Few returned. So, Selene learned control the way one learns to survive a storm, by becoming still. She trained herself to smile when her heart wanted to rage, to breathe slow when fear clawed at her chest. She wore a dark veil whenever she ventured into the village, claiming her eyes were weak to sunlight. The villagers pitied her frailness, never suspecting the truth. But it wasn't easy. Her emotions were a wild tide beneath the surface. One morning, while selling herbs at the market, a merchant's son pushed an old beggar into the dirt and laughed. The crowd joined in, and something in Selene snapped. Her pulse thundered, and before she could stop it, her eyes flared silver bright. The beggar gasped. So did she. Panicking, Selene turned away, pretending to shield her face from the sun. Her hands trembled as she dropped the herbs into the dust. She could feel eyes on her and suspicion, danger. The air grew thick with unease. Moments later, the village bell rang. The sound echoed through her bones. The inquisitors had arrived. She lowered her veil and forced her breathing steady, but deep inside, she knew the truth. She couldn't hide her power forever. Every heartbeat, every emotion was a risk. And someday, the world would see her for what she truly was, a witch born under silver light, a danger the king would not allow to live. That night the rain fell in sheets so heavy it drowned even the sound of footsteps. The storm had swallowed the village whole, thunder shaking the sky, wind tearing through the market stalls like paper. Selene was on her way home from the healer's hut, her cloak pulled tight, the hood shadowing her face. She hated storms. They always stirred something deep within her. The magic inside her pulsed with every lightning strike, whispering to be released, to breathe. As she turned a corner near the old well, she heard a scream, sharp, terrified, and small. A little boy stood at the edge of the bridge, his lantern fallen, his foot slipping on the rain-slick wood. The river below was swollen and wild, roaring with the fury of the storm. Without thinking, Selene ran toward him. The bridge cracked. The child fell. "No!" Her voice tore through the night. Silver light burst from her palms, wild, radiant, alive. It wrapped around the child like threads of moonlight, holding him suspended above the raging waters. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then she pulled him back up, trembling, clutching him to her chest as tears mixed with the rain. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, her hands glowing faintly as warmth spread into his small body. The boy blinked, dazed but unharmed. It wasn't until she looked up that she saw the shadows, two figures standing under the eaves of the tavern, cloaked in black, eyes reflecting cold torchlight. Inquisitors. She froze. The silver light flickered, then died, but it was too late. They had seen everything. The taller one leaned toward the other and murmured, "The mark of the moonblood. Tell the king." Selene's stomach turned to ice. She gathered the boy into his mother's arms, ignoring the woman's gasp of fear at her glowing hands. Without another word, Selene turned and vanished into the storm. Behind her, bells began to toll again, low, dreadful, certain. The Inquisition had found their witch. By dawn, the storm had passed, but its silence was worse than thunder. Selene woke to the sound of hooves pounding the dirt road, of doors slamming open, and of children crying. She peered from her window and her heart froze. The royal banners of obsidian and crimson fluttered in the cold wind. Soldiers of the Inquisition had arrived. They moved through the village like wolves through a flock of sheep, armored, merciless, faces hidden behind black steel masks. The captain rode at their front, his cloak snapping behind him, the symbol of the burning sun stitched across his chest, the mark of those who hunted magic. "By order of His Majesty, all who witnessed last night's witchcraft will come forth," the captain's voice thundered. "A woman with silver eyes has been seen using forbidden power. Surrender her, or this village burns." Selene's blood ran cold. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. Around her, villagers gathered in fear. People she had grown up with, played with, healed in secret. But now, they looked toward one another with suspicion. "It was the healer's girl," someone whispered. "I saw her last night near the bridge," another voice added. Selene's mother turned to her, panic in her eyes. "Go," she hissed. "Run, Selene. To the woods, go." Selene shook her head. "They'll hurt you if they think you're hiding me." Her mother grasped her shoulders. "They'll hurt everyone if you stay." Outside, soldiers kicked open doors, dragging men into the street. "A woman," screamed. The captain raised a torch, his expression like stone. "Bring the witch forward or the flames will decide for us." Selene's choice vanished. She slipped through the back door, barefoot, clutching her cloak tight. Behind her, she heard her mother cry out as the soldiers burst inside the healer's hut. The smell of smoke filled the air. By the time Selene reached the edge of the woods, her village was burning, orange light rising behind her like the wrath of heaven itself. She didn't look back, but as she ran into the dark forest, she heard one final command ring out from the captain's mouth, cold, absolute, and cruel. "Find the witch, dead or alive." The wind howled like the cries of the damned as Selene crossed the last ridge before the Black Mountains. The earth there turned dark and cracked, the air thick with mist that shimmered faintly, as though it remembered every soul that had once wandered too far. Behind her, the glow of her burning village still flickered in the distance. Her body trembled, her lungs ached, and her feet were torn from running barefoot across stones and thorns. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. They'll hurt Mother. They'll hurt everyone if I'm caught. The mountains rose before her, massive, jagged spires that clawed at the sky. Few dared to cross them, for beyond lay the cursed lands, a realm whispered to belong to creatures who had defied the gods. Those who entered never returned. As she approached the pass, an unnatural silence fell. No birds, no wind. Even the firelight from her village seemed to dim behind her, swallowed by shadow. Her fingers brushed the amulet around her neck, her mother's charm carved from moonstone. "Guide me," she whispered. The mountain mist curled around her feet like smoke. Her silver eyes glimmered faintly in the dark as if the land itself was watching. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, but her heart was heavier than fear. If she stayed, her family would die. If she fled, maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to survive. And so she stepped across the unseen border, into the cursed lands where no law of man or god ruled, only the whispers of old magic. The moment her foot touched the ashen soil beyond the black peak, the mist stirred, like something ancient had woken to her presence. A deep, unseen voice seemed to echo through the air, not with words, but with intent. "Another mortal dares to cross my realm." Selene's pulse raced. She didn't see anyone, but she felt the weight of eyes upon her, vast, cold, and immortal. She swallowed hard and whispered to the shadows, "I seek no trouble. I only seek safety." But the darkness seemed to answer with a low, amused rumble that trembled the ground beneath her feet. "Safety?" the voice murmured. "Then you have come to the wrong place, little witch." The mist thickened around Selene as she ventured deeper into the cursed lands. The air itself felt alive, cold, whispering, ancient. Every breath came out white, and the silence pressed on her ears until even her heartbeat sounded too loud. She stumbled upon an old road, cracked stone half swallowed by vines and ash. Broken statues lined its edges, their faces worn away by time, their eyes gouged out. Yet, even faceless, they seemed to watch her. The stories she'd heard as a child clawed their way back to her mind. Legends of the cursed realm where the Dark Sorcerer King, Draven, ruled over shadows and ghosts. They said he was not born of man, but of magic itself. A being of endless power who had defied the gods and been cast into exile. They said his very breath could turn blood to ice, and that those who wandered into his lands were claimed body and soul, never to return. Selene's steps faltered. "The Dark Sorcerer King," she whispered to herself. "Draven." A chill rippled through the mist at the sound of his name. Her pulse quickened and she tightened her cloak around her shoulders, though it did nothing to keep out the unnatural cold. She tried to remind herself she wasn't here to fight him or seek him. She only needed a place to hide until the crowned soldiers gave up the search. But deep down, she already sensed the truth. This land was alive, bound to the will of its master. The road bent into a valley where the fog grew silver and thick. Through it, Selene caught her first glimpse of something vast, the faint outline of a castle carved from black stone, its towers rising like jagged fangs against a dying sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating its iron gates and towering spires. For a moment, awe swallowed her fear. The place was both terrible and magnificent, like a monument built to defy heaven itself. And then she heard it again. That voice. Low, deep, everywhere. "You have crossed into my dominion, mortal." Selene froze. The mist before her stirred, parting like a curtain. A tall, dark figure stepped forward, his presence bending the air around him. cloaked in black, eyes like burning silver beneath a hood, the Dark Sorcerer King, Draven, stood before her. The ground trembled with every slow step he took. "Few dare trespass here," he said, his tone calm yet filled with power. "Tell me, girl with silver eyes, why should I let you live?" Rain poured from the colorless sky as Selene stumbled through the jagged valley, her cloak torn and soaked through. Her strength was nearly gone. Every breath came with a shiver that reached her bones. Behind her, the howls of the cursed wind sounded almost human, as though the land itself mocked her suffering. Her boots sank into black mud as she forced herself forward, clutching her side where a cut from her flight still bled faintly. She had run for days without rest, with nothing but fear and instinct guiding her. When at last she reached the foot of a hill, her vision swam. Through the haze she saw it, a fortress of stone darker than midnight, rising out of the mist like the bones of a god. Its towers pierced the clouds, its windows glowed faintly with a ghostly light. The gates loomed before her, massive and sealed, carved with symbols she didn't understand. She took one trembling step toward them, whispering to herself, "Please, just somewhere to hide." Lightning slashed across the sky, casting her reflection in a pool of rainwater, pale face, tangled hair, and those unmistakable silver eyes glinting in the dark. Her knees buckled. The world spun. The echo of her fall was swallowed by the rain as she collapsed at the base of the gates, unconscious. As her body went still, the fortress responded. The great gates creaked open on their own, their metal groaning like something long asleep being stirred awake. From within the darkness, shadows gathered, twisting, crawling, taking form. A pair of glowing eyes appeared above her fallen body, ancient and unreadable. The deep voice that had haunted the mist whispered again, closer now, more curious than cruel. "So, the silver-eyed girl has come to me at last." A pale hand, cold as moonlight, reached down from the shadows, and Selene was lifted gently from the ground as the gates of the fortress closed behind her. The heavy iron gates groaned open with a sound that split the silence like thunder. No guard stood watch, no torchlight burned along the walls, only the whisper of unseen power moving through the air. Selene stirred, blinking through the rain that streaked her lashes. She hadn't touched the gates, yet they parted as though the fortress itself recognized her. A shiver crawled up her spine. She took a hesitant step forward, her boots echoing on the slick stone. The air inside was strangely warm, thick with the scent of smoke, magic, and something ancient that made her heartbeat quicken. The massive doors shut behind her with a clang that trembled through her bones. Shadows danced along the walls like living things twisting into strange, half-familiar forms. Faces that seemed to watch her, disappear, then return, again. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling. The word vanished into the endless hall. In answer, faint lights ignited along the corridor, candles lighting themselves one by one, leading her deeper inside. The sight was terrifying, yet oddly mesmerizing. Each flame flickered silver, mirroring the strange glow of her eyes. It felt like she was walking inside a dream, one both beautiful and dreadful. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the darkness ahead. The air grew heavy, as though the very walls held their breath. And when the figure finally emerged from the shadow, tall, draped in black, eyes like burning gold, Selene's blood ran cold. Because though she had never seen him before, she knew who he was. The Dark Sorcerer King, Draven. Selene froze as she stepped further into the dim corridor. The air hummed, not with sound but with the pulse of unseen energy. From the edges of the hall, hooded figures began to emerge, their movements slow and silent. They surrounded her, forming a half circle, faces hidden beneath black hoods stitched with silver runes. One of them spoke in a voice that rasped like dry leaves. "The silver-eyed one has come." The others echoed softly. "The silver-eyed one. The marked one. The lost heir of light." Selene's breath hitched. How do they know me? She thought, clutching her cloak tighter around her trembling hands. Another figure stepped forward, holding a candle that burned with violet flame. The light touched her face, and gasps rippled through the group. Her silver eyes glowed faintly, betraying the very secret she had fled to protect. She carries the old power, whispered one. The same power that once rivaled the king's. The words struck her like arrows. Rivaled the king's? What were they saying? Her pulse raced as she took a step back. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. I didn't come here for power. I just needed to hide. A low chuckle echoed from the darkness beyond them. Deep, rich, and dangerous. The cloaked figures immediately fell to one knee, bowing their heads. Selene turned toward the sound, her heart thundering. And from the shadows at the far end of the hall, Draven appeared. Tall, commanding, his black robes flowing like smoke, eyes gleaming with molten gold. Hide, he murmured, his voice both cruel and curious. You've run into my domain, silver-eyed girl. There is no hiding here. The candles flickered. The whispers faded into silence. And Selene realized that whatever fate she had tried to escape, she had just walked straight into it. Selene was dragged, though gently, through winding corridors lit by floating embers of blue fire. The cloaked figures kept their distance, whispering prayers or curses she couldn't tell apart. Each step echoed, swallowed by the vastness of the fortress, until the doors before her swung open on their own. The throne room was a cathedral of shadows, high ceilings draped in black silk, walls pulsing faintly with runes that seemed alive. At its center, on a throne carved from obsidian, sat King Draven. He was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. His presence filled the room like a storm before lightning strikes. Long, dark hair spilled over his shoulders, and his eyes, gold burning within pitch-black sclera, studied her with both amusement and danger. Selene tried to kneel, but her knees refused to bend. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet her body stayed frozen under his gaze. You've wandered far from your little village, he said softly, his voice smooth as velvet yet heavy as thunder. Few dare cross into my lands and live. I didn't come to challenge you, she said quickly. I was only running from the king who fears magic, he finished for her, leaning forward. And yet you carry it openly in your blood. Her heart skipped. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. His lips curved in a dark smile. You're like me. Those words sent a chill through her. Draven rose from his throne, the shadows moving with him like living creatures. As he descended the steps, she realized how tall he was, how every motion seemed both graceful and dangerous. He stopped before her, close enough for her to see the faint scar that traced his jaw. Tell me, little witch, he murmured, tilting her chin upward with a gloved hand. Will you beg for mercy? Or offer me your power instead? Selene's pulse hammered in her throat. For the first time, she saw past his darkness and sensed a sorrow buried deep beneath it. But she also knew one thing. Her life and her secret now belonged to the Dark Sorcerer King. Draven's golden eyes flared, reflecting the faint shimmer of Selene's silver ones. The air between them grew thick, alive with the pulse of unspoken power. She could feel him probing at her aura, unraveling her defenses like silk threads. So, he said at last, his voice a low murmur that carried to every corner of the throne room. The tales were true. A child of the moon walks among mortals. Selene's breath caught. What do you mean? He circled her slowly, his cloak whispering across the marble floor. Your power isn't new. It's ancient. Dangerous. The kind that destroys kings and births empires. His tone darkened. And yet you hide it. Such a waste. She straightened, anger piercing through her fear. I never asked for it. I just want to live in peace. Draven stopped behind her. Peace? He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. There is no peace for those touched by the old magic. Then, in one smooth motion, he raised his hand. The air crackled, black lightning forming around his fingers. You have two choices, Selene of the Silver Eyes. Her name sounded like a spell from his lips. Serve me, and live under my protection. His gaze locked with hers, the offer both a command and a trap. Or refuse, and die here, in the same darkness that gave you life. Selene's heart pounded. To serve the Dark Sorcerer King meant becoming part of everything she'd been taught to fear. But to refuse meant death, not just for her, but perhaps for the last remnants of hope she carried. The silence stretched. Finally, her voice trembled, but her words did not. If I serve you, she said, meeting his gaze, it will be on my own terms. For the briefest moment, Draven's lips curved, not in mockery, but in respect. Then rise, little witch, he whispered, for from this moment on, your life belongs to me. Selene's knees weakened beneath the weight of his words. The shadows of the throne room seemed to breathe, curling around her like living smoke. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. Her life as she knew it was gone. The simple village girl who once dreamed of peace was now bound to the most feared man in the kingdom. I will serve you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Draven tilted his head, studying her as though she were a puzzle he meant to solve. Good, he said softly, almost too softly for someone called the Dark King. You will learn the ways of my court, you will obey my word, and in return, his eyes glimmered like molten gold, you will live. With a single gesture he dismissed the guards. The heavy doors groaned shut, sealing her fate. A cloaked woman approached, eyes pale as frost. Come, girl, she said. The king's servants must be trained. Selene followed, her footsteps echoing down the endless corridors of the obsidian fortress. Torches flickered with blue fire, and ancient runes glowed faintly on the walls. She could feel the magic humming beneath the stone, dark and alive. As she walked, she vowed silently to herself. No one must know what I am. No one must see the silver in my eyes. If Draven ever discovered the full extent of her power, the ancient magic that ran deeper than his own, she would become more than a servant. She would become his weapon. And that was a fate, worse than death. Draven rose from his throne, his long cloak whispering across the black marble floor. The air thickened, vibrating with ancient power as he approached Selene. If you are to serve me, he said, his voice deep and cold as thunder, then your loyalty must be sealed. Selene's breath caught. She didn't understand until he raised his hand, and a crimson sigil shimmered in the air between them, a mark shaped like interlocking flames. It pulsed as though alive, breathing darkness. What is that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Draven's eyes glowed faintly. A bond, he said. A promise carved into magic. It ties your life to mine, your heart to my command. Should you betray me? He leaned closer, his words brushing against her skin like ice. It will burn you from the inside out. Before she could protest, the sigil descended onto her chest. Pain flared through her body like fire and lightning. She gasped, falling to her knees, clutching her heart as the mark branded her skin, glowing red, then fading to a dull, haunting silver. Draven watched without pity. Now, he said quietly, you are mine. When the pain subsided, Selene staggered to her feet, her mind a storm of fear and defiance. The mark still pulsed faintly beneath her clothes, a cruel reminder that her life no longer belonged to her. But as she lowered her gaze, a strange spark stirred in her heart. She had survived the bond, something no ordinary human could endure. And though Draven didn't yet know it, the connection worked both ways. Somewhere deep within the magic, she could feel him too, his rage, his sorrow, his secrets. the curse that was meant to enslave her, might one day be the key to breaking him. Days turned into nights, and Selene's new life inside the dark fortress began in a haunting rhythm. No sunlight ever touched its walls, only the flicker of blue fire from enchanted torches lit her way. She was assigned no chains, no cell, just endless silence and duties that tested her every nerve. Her first task was in the Library of Echoes, a massive hall filled with books that whispered when opened. The air was heavy with old ink, ash, and secrets. Every step she took echoed softly through the corridors, and the shadows seemed to listen. By day, she organized grimoires older than the kingdom itself, books that pulsed with living magic. By night, she carried trays of silver goblets and strange herbs to the alchemy chambers, where sorcerers brewed elixirs that glowed like molten stars. No one spoke much to her. The servants avoided her eyes, and the other apprentices seemed afraid, not of her, but of what might happen if she spoke too loudly, or looked too long at the wrong thing. Sometimes, in the deepest halls, she caught glimpses of Draven, his dark robes trailing like smoke, his eyes faintly illuminated by spells he didn't need to speak aloud. He never acknowledged her presence, yet she felt his gaze linger for a heartbeat longer than it should. And though she kept her head bowed, she couldn't help wondering, was she serving a tyrant, or a man burdened by a power even he could not control? Every task, every quiet hour, whispered a warning and a question. How long could she keep her magic hidden from the very king who ruled over it? One night, as thunder rolled over the Black Mountains, Selene saw the full extent of King Draven's power for the first time. She had been sent to deliver a sealed scroll to the high balcony of the fortress, a place forbidden to ordinary servants. But as she approached, the air grew thick with magic, crackling like a living storm. When she stepped into the courtyard below, she froze. Draven stood at the heart of a raging tempest, his cloak whipping in the wind. Lightning coiled around his hands like serpents made of light. With a mere flick of his fingers, he split the sky, calling down thunder as though the heavens obeyed him. At his command, the storm bent and swirled. Not wild, but controlled, tamed by sheer will. Then came the fire, swirling in his palm, turning into a blazing sphere before dissolving into golden dust. Selene's breath caught. No mortal man should wield such command over the elements. But what struck her most wasn't his power. It was his silence. His face was unreadable, yet his eyes burned with something between fury and sorrow. When a frightened guard stammered nearby, Draven turned his gaze on him, and the man immediately dropped to his knees, clutching his head as if every secret in his soul were being ripped out. Selene trembled, clutching the scroll to her chest. She understood now why the world called him a monster, why no one dared defy him. But she also sensed something else, an emptiness behind the power, a loneliness that felt strangely familiar. As she slipped away, heart racing, she whispered to herself, "He commands the elements. But who commands his heart?" Days turned into weeks, and Selene began to notice what others dared not speak of. The silence that ruled the Dark King's halls. Every corridor of the fortress seemed frozen in time. Long tables sat untouched, their golden plates gathering dust. Music had not echoed through those walls in years. Servants moved like shadows, speaking only in whispers, their eyes always lowered. And at the center of it all was Draven, a ruler surrounded by power yet utterly alone. From the upper gallery, Selene often glimpsed him walking the empty throne room after midnight. He would stand before a shattered mirror, his reflection fractured into 100 pieces. Sometimes he spoke softly to the air, as though someone invisible stood beside him. Once she saw him place a hand on a faded portrait of a woman, her features gentle, her smile haunting. A flicker of grief passed across his sharp face before he turned away, his cloak swirling like smoke. No laughter ever rose in his court. No counsel met him in joy. Only commands, obedience, and silence. Even his loyal warlocks avoided his gaze. Selene began to wonder what kind of pain could turn a man into a legend of fear. Beneath the black armor and the cruel reputation, she sensed something wounded. A loneliness so deep it seemed to echo through the stones themselves. And though she told herself to stay invisible, her heart, foolish, curious, and alive, began to pity the Dark Sorcerer King. Late each night, when the fortress fell silent and the torches dimmed to blue embers, Selene crept into the great library, a cathedral of forgotten power. The shelves stretched higher than any mortal could climb, filled with dust-covered tomes bound in dragon hide and inked with symbols that glowed faintly under moonlight. The air smelled of ash, parchment, and secrets. By day she obeyed, by night she learned. Her curiosity, once a quiet whisper, grew into a flame. She traced runes on ancient scrolls, her silver eyes flickering as the words came alive. She found fragments of old languages, remnants of a time when humans and sorcerers lived side by side. One night, she discovered a volume sealed with blood wax. It pulsed faintly beneath her fingers. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Inside, the text spoke of soul binding, mirror spells, and a prophecy of a girl with silver in her eyes and light in her blood. Her hands trembled. Could it be about her? Just as she whispered the words aloud, the candles flickered, and a deep voice filled the room. "Those are not words for servants," said Draven from the shadows, his crimson eyes burning through the dark. Selene froze, the book half open in her hands. Her heart pounded. But for the first time she did not bow. Instead she met his gaze, the light of her secret power reflecting in her eyes, and the air between them hummed with something ancient, dangerous, and alive. That night, as Selene pored over a faded grimoire, the ink on its pages began to swirl and shift. The candles guttered though there was no wind, and a cold mist crept across the floor. Then, a whisper. Soft, broken, yet filled with power. "Child of light," it breathed. Selene's breath caught as a figure began to take form. Translucent, glowing faintly blue, the outline of a woman draped in tattered robes. Her eyes were mournful, her voice echoing like wind through tombs. "The Sorcerer King fears you," the spirit said, her gaze piercing through Selene's trembling form. "He binds those who shine too bright, lest they outmatch his shadow." Selene clutched the table, heart hammering. "Who are you?" The spirit drifted closer, her light touching the sigil burned into Selene's wrist. It hissed faintly, reacting to her presence. "I was once like you," the ghost whispered, sorrow thick in her tone. "I served him, until he realized my magic rivaled his own." Selene's blood ran cold. "What did he do to you?" The spirit smiled sadly. "He caged my soul within these walls, but you are different. Your power is not born of darkness but of the stars. Be wary, Selene. When the shadow begins to care for the light, it will try to consume it." The candles flared white, and the spirit vanished, leaving only the scent of frost and the echo of her warning. Selene stood frozen, her hand on the ancient book, realizing for the first time that her greatest danger might not be Draven's wrath, but his heart. The next evening, Selene was in the great library again, that endless chamber of floating shelves and whispering parchment. She thought she was alone, but shadows have eyes in Draven's fortress. She was tracing runes on an open page when the air changed, thickened, colder. A soft clap echoed behind her. "You read boldly for a servant," came that deep, silken voice. Selene froze. The Sorcerer King stepped out of the gloom, his robes trailing like smoke, eyes burning like black fire. Her pulse quickened. "Forgive me, my lord," she stammered. "I was only curious?" His lips curved slightly. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing here." He raised his hand, and the world shattered. The walls melted into mist, the books became wings, beating around her like ravens. She stumbled backward, suddenly standing on a narrow bridge over a roaring abyss. Voices cried her name from below, twisting into the screams of her village. Draven's voice filled the air. "Tell me, little witch, can you tell what is real?" Selene's breath came in gasps. The bridge cracked. Flames licked her feet. She whispered the first spell she'd ever learned, one her mother had taught her to calm storms, Lux in Tenebris. A faint light shimmered around her, silver and pure. The illusion faltered. The abyss vanished, and she was back in the library, trembling but standing tall. Draven regarded her in silence, surprise flickering through his eyes. "Interesting," he murmured. "No one has broken my illusions before." Selene swallowed hard, defiance sparking in her chest. "Perhaps you underestimate me, my lord." His gaze lingered on her, intense and unreadable. Then he smiled, not kindly, but like a man who had found a mystery worth keeping. "Perhaps," he said softly, "and perhaps you should not." Draven's eyes darkened, his presence pressing against her like a storm. "You wield light," he said slowly, stepping closer. "The rarest form of magic, born from the stars themselves. It should not exist in this age." Selene backed away until her spine met a pillar. "I didn't mean to." "Lies." His tone turned cold. "You hide behind obedience while you study my craft in secret." He extended his hand, power curling from his fingers like smoke. "Do not think your light can defy the shadows." Something inside her snapped. Fear, anger, years of being hunted and silent. "I am not yours to command." The air trembled. A pulse of silver exploded from her chest, brighter than moonlight, pure and searing. The torches went out. The marble floor beneath them cracked like thunder, spiderweb fractures glowing with radiant light. Draven staggered back, shielding his face with one arm. His magic surged to counter hers, but the silver radiance pierced through, wrapping around them both. The fortress trembled, chandeliers crashed, walls groaned, the sigil on her wrist blazed with pain and power. When the light dimmed, Selene stood at the center of a shattered floor, her eyes glowing silver white, her hair floating in a halo of energy. Draven stared at her, half in fury, half in awe. "You," he whispered, breathless. "You could destroy me." Selene's voice was steady, echoing softly in the ruined hall. "Or free you." For a heartbeat, the Sorcerer King said nothing. Then he smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that held both fear and fascination. "So," he murmured, stepping closer once more. "The light finally fights back." The smoke cleared slowly, settling over the shattered marble like gray snow. Dust drifted through the air, catching what little light was left in the hall. Selene stood trembling, her hand still faintly glowing silver. Draven's guards burst in, blades drawn and spells ready, but the Sorcerer King lifted a single hand, stopping them cold. His gaze never left her. The sigil that bound her still pulsed faintly on her wrist, but instead of pain, she felt warmth, his magic no longer crushing hers, but resonating with it. Draven stepped forward, cloak trailing behind him like living shadow. His face, usually unreadable, was now a storm of emotion, anger, wonder, and something close to reverence. "Moonfire," he breathed, the word like a memory from another age. "You bear the light of the ancients." Selene swallowed hard, her knees threatening to give way. "Please," she whispered. "Don't kill me." He tilted his head, studying her as if she were a riddle written by the gods. "Kill you?" A faint, incredulous smile touched his lips. "No. The stars themselves would curse me for it." He reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of her glowing hand, careful, almost reverent. The light flickered, but did not burn him. "You are the girl of Moonfire," he said softly, voice lowering like a vow. "The last light born under a blood eclipse." Selene's heart raced. What? What does that mean?" He withdrew his hand, the faintest tremor in his tone. "It means," he said, that fate has brought me the one being who can either save my kingdom or end it. And for the first time, Selene saw it, not just the power or the cruelty, but the faint trace of fear in the Dark Sorcerer King's eyes. From that night onward, everything changed. No longer was Selene sweeping the endless corridors or mixing nameless potions in the cold alchemy rooms. Instead, she stood beside the Dark Sorcerer King himself, her silver eyes mirroring the glow of his black flame. Draven's voice filled the grand hall as he drew circles of power in the air, ancient symbols that shimmered like constellations. "Magic," he said, "is not evil, Selene. It is hunger. It becomes what the heart desires most." She listened, every word burning into her mind. He taught her to weave shadow, to summon light, to control the whispers of spirits that drifted through his cursed fortress. Her hands, once trembling, began to move with purpose, shaping spells that had not been spoken for centuries. But training under Draven was perilous. A single mistake could unravel a soul. Many nights she collapsed from exhaustion, her power draining her to the edge of death. Still, he never stopped her. Sometimes, when she faltered, he steadied her wrist, his touch cold, yet strangely grounding. "You have more control than you think," he would say quietly. "Fear is the leash that magic bites through first." And though she never admitted it, she began to feel something shift inside her. Not fear, not obedience, but an understanding of him. The monster the world feared was also a man bound by loneliness and guilt. The servants whispered in disbelief. The girl who had entered as a slave now stood beside their king, sharing his throne of magic. Selene, the servant of shadows, was becoming something else, an apprentice destined to walk the same perilous path as the Dark Sorcerer King himself. Days melted into weeks within the dark fortress, and Selene's training grew harsher. Each lesson peeled away another layer of her innocence. Draven's teachings were merciless. He demanded control over pain, emotion, and fear. "Magic is born from what you endure," he told her, his voice echoing through the obsidian hall. "The greater your suffering, the stronger your spell." At first, she resisted the idea, but the truth soon revealed itself. Every spell she cast drew from memory, from the nights she'd hidden her glowing eyes, from the screams when the soldiers came for her, from the loneliness of exile. Her pain became her source, her heartbeat the rhythm of the storm she wielded. Draven watched in silence as she learned to summon lightning from sorrow and heal wounds with tears, but he never looked pleased. Instead, there was a shadow of regret in his gaze, as though he saw his own past reflected in her struggle. One night, when her spell backfired and seared her arm, Selene cried out, collapsing to the cold floor. Draven knelt beside her, his hand hovering just above her wound. "You see," he murmured, "power demands a price, and it never stops collecting." The pain faded slowly, but his words didn't. Selene understood then. To master magic was to bleed for it, again and again. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark refused to die. She would learn, she told herself, not for domination, but for freedom. That night, as storm clouds gathered above the fortress, Draven summoned Selene to the highest tower. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and old magic. She climbed the spiraling stairs, unsure why he had called her. His tone had been quieter than usual, almost human. When she entered, he stood before a window of black glass, watching lightning crawl across the sky. His cloak shifted like living shadow, but his eyes, once fierce and unyielding, carried a weariness she hadn't seen before. "Do you know," he began, his voice low, "why I command darkness?" Selene hesitated, shaking her head. He turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw not a king of terror but a man cursed by grief. "Centuries ago, I loved a woman who shone brighter than the sun. When she died, I tried to bring her back. I tore open the veil between life and death, and the darkness answered. He raised a hand to his chest and the air shimmered. A faint pulse of shadow flickered beneath his skin. His heart, blackened and slow. It took her soul and left me this, he continued bitterly. A heart that beats only for the night. Since then I've ruled what I cannot escape. The void that feeds on my pain. Selene's breath caught. The monster the world feared was once a man who had simply loved too deeply. Draven's eyes lifted to hers, glowing faintly. Do you understand now, little Moonfire? Magic is not evil. It's love twisted by loss. She didn't speak. She couldn't. But in that moment something shifted between them. The servant saw the man beneath the curse, and the sorcerer saw the only soul brave enough to pity him. Since that night in the tower, Draven found it harder to remain the cold, calculating ruler he had always been. Selene's quiet presence haunted the corners of his thoughts like moonlight cutting through endless fog. When she passed him in the great halls, carrying scrolls or trays of potion vials, his gaze would linger a moment too long. The air seemed to hum between them, her silver aura softening the oppressive weight of the castle's darkness. During their lessons, her laughter, rare but unguarded, unsettled him. No one had laughed in his fortress for centuries. No one dared. He caught himself watching her hands as she traced runes, her concentration pure and bright. Once, when their fingers brushed over a spellbook, he pulled away too quickly, as though burned by something far more dangerous than fire. Draven retreated to his chambers that night, pacing before the same window where he'd once sworn to feel nothing again. But now his vow wavered. Selene was awakening a heartbeat he thought was long gone, and that frightened him more than any curse ever could. The whispers began to crawl through the corridors of the obsidian fortress like poison through veins. The council, ancient sorcerers bound to Draven's rule, gathered in secret chambers, their hoods low, their voices hissing in the candlelight. The girl's power grows each day, one muttered. She is not loyal, another warned. Moonfire consumes everything it touches. They remembered the prophecy, that one born with silver eyes would rise to challenge the darkness itself. And now, that prophecy lived under their roof. Draven dismissed their fears at first, but doubt began to stir in him too. Selene's magic had grown far beyond his expectations. One evening, during a ritual lesson, the silver light around her flared so brightly, it shattered his enchanted mirror. A mirror that had survived centuries of curses. The council took it as an omen. She will destroy you, they said. And with you, the kingdom. Draven silenced them with a single command, his eyes blazing. But when night fell, and he stood alone in the throne room, the words echoed in his mind like a prophecy refusing to die. The whispers no longer hid in shadows. They echoed through every hall of Draven's fortress. The council, ancient and cruel, met in the Tower of Ashes, their faces half hidden by smoke and candlelight. They had served the Sorcerer King for centuries, surviving wars and curses, but never had they seen anything like Selene. She is dangerous, rasped High Magus Corveth, his skeletal hand trembling over his staff. Power that pure cannot be contained. She is light in a realm of shadow, hissed another. If she continues to grow, she will unmake everything we've built. Their voices rose, bitter and fearful, as they reminded one another of the prophecy, the one written in blood and starlight. A daughter of the moon shall rise, and the darkness shall bow or perish. Meanwhile, Selene continued to study under Draven's reluctant guidance. Her silver fire grew stronger each day, glowing through her veins like liquid moonlight. It frightened even her. Draven watched her from afar, torn between admiration and dread. She reminded him of a time before his heart was bound to darkness, when love had not been a curse but a light. Yet that same light now threatened the delicate balance of his rule. One evening, while teaching her to weave protective wards, Draven felt the air shift. Selene's magic surged uncontrollably, a storm of silver radiance bursting from her hands. The ground cracked, Runes blazed, and the enchanted mirrors lining the chamber shattered into dust. The entire castle shook. When the light faded, Selene fell to her knees, horrified by what she'd done. Draven's council appeared almost instantly, their robes trailing like shadows behind them. "Do you see now?" Corveth sneered. "She is not your apprentice, my lord. She is your doom." Draven turned toward them, eyes glowing with restrained fury. "If anyone touches her," he said quietly, "they will beg for death before I grant it." The council withdrew, but their hatred did not. That night, as the moonlight poured through the fortress windows, Draven stood alone in the grand hall, his reflection scattered in shards of broken glass. "She will destroy you," Corveth's words replayed in his mind. But somewhere deep within, another voice whispered, "Or she will save you." The attack came without warning, a betrayal from within. Draven's own council, twisted by fear and jealousy, summoned ancient demons from the void, creatures of smoke and flame, to overthrow their king before the prophecy could come true. The fortress trembled as magic clashed against stone, its great black towers cracking under the weight of chaos. Draven fought back with all his might. Shadows rose at his command, swallowing enemies whole. But even his power began to wane. Centuries of curses had drained his strength. The demons closed in, their shrieks echoing through the great hall like the cries of the damned. Selene burst through the doors, her silver eyes blazing. She didn't think. She felt. Her hands ignited with moonfire, radiant, untamed, alive. The ground pulsed with light as she stretched her arms wide, forming a barrier between Draven and the monsters. The light rippled outward, silencing the darkness, her energy clashing against the infernal flames until the whole hall was drenched in white fire. The demons recoiled, screaming as their shadows burned away. The traitorous mages turned to ash beneath the brilliance. Draven staggered back, awestruck, his crimson cloak torn and his face illuminated by her power. Selene's hair whipped wildly around her, her voice trembling with strength she didn't know she possessed. "No one," she cried, "will touch him." For the first time in centuries, the Dark Sorcerer King, ruler of fear, master of death, found himself shielded, not by shadows, but by light. And it wasn't his doing. It was hers. When the fire finally faded, Draven looked up through the smoke. Selene stood before him trembling, her palms still glowing faintly silver. He reached out slowly, voice soft and shaken. "You would risk your life. For me?" Selene met his eyes, her breathing unsteady. "You once saved me from death," she whispered. "Now I return what you gave." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. But inside, something even greater stirred. For the first time since his curse began, Draven's heart beat. The mark on Selene's hand burned suddenly, not with pain this time, but with warmth. A pulse of light rippled from her palm, glowing through the air like liquid silver. The sigil that once chained her to Draven's will began to twist, its dark lines unraveling, reshaping into something new. She gasped, clutching her hand as the magic deepened. "What's happening to me?" Draven stepped closer, eyes widening. He could feel it too. The connection between them shifting. No longer master and servant, no longer curse and captive. The bond was alive, breathing, evolving into something neither of them could control. "The mark," he whispered, reaching out but stopping just short of touching her skin. "It's rewriting itself, responding to your power." Selene lifted her hand toward him, the light reflecting in his crimson eyes. "You said it was a binding spell, one that tied my life to your command." "It was," he said quietly, almost in awe. "But now, it binds us as equals." A tremor passed through the room. The sigil shimmered, forming a new shape, a crescent moon intertwined with a black flame. Where darkness and light met, their magic merged, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. Draven's breath caught. "Our souls are no longer separate," he murmured. You've changed the spell itself. Selene's heart pounded. The power that had once enslaved her now connected them in a way deeper than either had imagined. Not of control, but of shared destiny. I didn't mean to, she whispered, her voice trembling. Draven's gaze softened, a rare smile ghosting across his lips. Perhaps it was never meant to be undone, only transformed. The mark dimmed slowly, leaving a faint glow beneath her skin, a living symbol of what had just begun. The servant was gone. The sorceress was awakening. And beside her the Dark King stood not as her master, but as her fated counterpart. Draven froze when the surge of emotion hit him, not his own, but hers. Through the living bond that linked them, he could feel Selene's heartbeat echoing within his chest. Her fear like trembling silver threads, her courage burning bright beneath it. And something else, something dangerous. Love. It was faint at first, soft as moonlight, yet impossible to ignore. When her gaze met his, he felt it pulse again, weaving through the dark corridors of his mind. For centuries he had felt nothing but shadows, but now warmth flickered where coldness used to reign. Selene, unaware of what he truly sensed, turned away to steady her breath. The connection had deepened since the mark changed, and sometimes she felt his emotions too. Heavy grief, the echo of endless solitude, the weight of memories he'd never spoken of. Draven's hand twitched at his side. You shouldn't feel this, he said under his breath, half to her, half to himself. I'm bound to darkness. To love me is to be consumed by it. Selene turned, her silver eyes calm but glistening. Maybe that's not true anymore. For the first time in centuries, the mighty Sorcerer King didn't know what to say. The ancient spell had done something no magic ever could. It had made him vulnerable. And in the silence that followed, their bond pulsed once more, alive with shared emotion, fear, wonder, and an unspoken truth neither dared yet name. The servant and the master were gone. What stood between them now was something far more dangerous, a love written in blood and magic. Draven withdrew from her suddenly, as if burned by her very presence. His cloak swept the floor like a shadow recoiling from the dawn. Enough, he said sharply, voice trembling beneath the weight of something unspoken. You don't understand what you're awakening. Selene's heart ached. The mark on her hand still glowed faintly, proof that their souls remained linked. Why are you doing this? She demanded, stepping closer despite his retreat. You said my power could help you, that was before I felt it, he interrupted, eyes flaring with ancient pain. Your light, it cuts through the curse. It weakens what keeps me alive. The realization hit her like a storm. Her power, the very thing that connected them, was destroying him. Draven turned away, hiding the agony twisting across his features. If you continue to stay near me, your light will consume my darkness. And when it does, I will cease to exist. Selene's breath caught. The thought of losing him, the man who had once terrified her, yet now haunted her every heartbeat, was unbearable. But he stepped further into the shadows, his form flickering like dying flame. Go back to the mortal lands, he said, voice low, broken. Forget me, before your magic destroys what little remains of my soul. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering like molten silver. You saved me, Draven, she whispered. Now let me save you. But the Dark Sorcerer King was gone before she could reach him, vanishing into mist, leaving only the echo of his final words and the ache of a bond that refused to die. Selene ran through the endless corridors of obsidian and silver, her breath sharp in the cold air. The castle seemed to shift around her, walls twisting like living shadows, every doorway leading her back to where she began. She clutched her satchel and forced her way toward the great doors. I have to leave. I can't stay where I'm not wanted. The heavy gates loomed before her, symbols of stars and serpents carved into their iron. She reached for the latch. But before her fingers touched it, Pain lanced through her chest. The mark on her hand flared white-hot. She cried out, collapsing to her knees. Threads of silver light spiraled out of her palm, binding her to the air. No, to him. "Draven," she gasped, feeling his heartbeat in her veins, his pain echoing her own. The sigil pulsed like a living thing, dragging her backward step by step. The wind howled as though the castle itself forbade her to leave. Her tears burned as the truth sank in. She could not escape him. From the shadows above, his voice echoed, deep, weary, yet laced with sorrow. "You can't run, Selene," he said. "The bond won't let you go. My curse is yours now." Her hands trembled as she looked up at the darkness surrounding her. "Then I am trapped here forever?" she whispered. A pause, then softly, "Not trapped," he murmured. "Chosen." But his words felt more like chains than comfort. And as the mark dimmed, Selene realized she was bound not just by magic, but by a destiny she never asked for. Thunder rolled over the black mountains as the kingdom's army approached, their banners rippling with gold and crimson. From the highest tower, Selene watched the valley blaze with torchlight. 1,000 soldiers marching under the symbol of the sun, the very emblem that outlawed her kind. Their armor gleamed with consecrated runes, their blades humming with holy fire. At their head rode the High Inquisitor, draped in white and red robes, holding aloft a crystal relic said to banish all darkness. "The light of the crown shall purge this land," his voice boomed, echoing through the night. "The Dark Sorcerer King and his witch will burn." Selene's heart froze. They were coming for Draven, and for her. Down in the courtyard, the air shimmered as Draven emerged from the shadows, his long cloak billowing like storm clouds. Power radiated from him, dark and magnificent, but Selene saw what others could not, the fatigue behind his eyes, the pain in every breath. "They've come to end me," he said quietly, his voice like iron cracking. "And they will destroy everything to do it." Selene stepped beside him, gripping the railing. "Then we fight," she said, fire flashing in her silver eyes. "But not as monsters, as who we really are." For the first time, he turned to her, truly looking. The faintest trace of awe flickered across his face. "You would stand against your own people for me?" She lifted her chin. "For truth, for freedom, for what's right." Lightning split the sky above them, illuminating the army's advance. The clash of faith and forbidden magic about to ignite. The storm had come, and this time, Selene would not run. The castle trembled beneath the echo of war drums as Draven stood in the Hall of Shadows, his cloak rippling like living smoke. The ancient runes carved into the black stone walls glowed faintly, the same ones that bound his soul to darkness centuries ago. Selene burst through the doors, breathless. "You can't face them alone," she cried. Draven turned, his expression calm but resolute. "I've lived too long in defiance of fate," he said softly. "This is where it ends. The blood I spill tonight will break their holy seal and stop the slaughter." Selene's eyes widened as she realized what he meant. "You mean your blood?" He didn't deny it. Instead, he walked toward the center of the hall, where a glowing circle of power pulsed beneath his boots, a spell of death and rebirth, forbidden even among dark mages. "If I die by my own hand," he said, "the curse will die with me. The army will lose its cause. Peace will return." Tears welled in Selene's eyes. "And what about me?" Draven's gaze softened, shadows flickering around his face. "You were never meant to be part of this darkness. You brought light where there was none. You freed me more than any spell could." The bond mark on Selene's palm flared in silver fire, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. She felt his pain, his resolve, and his love all at once. "No," she whispered fiercely, stepping into the circle. If you die, your curse dies, but so do I. The bond won't let you go alone. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Fear for her. Outside, thunder cracked as the army drew closer. Inside, two souls bound by magic and love faced the impossible choice: sacrifice or salvation. Draven reached out, brushing his hand across her cheek, his voice barely above a whisper. Then perhaps, he said, we'll find a way to end the curse together. The storm outside raged like the fury of gods, lightning splitting the skies above the black spires of the fortress. Draven stood at the center of the spell circle, shadows coiling around him like serpents ready to strike. His power pulsed with destructive intent, the kind of magic that could tear the veil between worlds. One final spell, one final sacrifice, and it would all be over. Then the doors burst open. Selene stepped through, her hair wild from the wind, her silver eyes blazing with light that outshone the torches. "You're not doing this," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Not alone." Draven's expression hardened. "Selene, you don't understand. My curse feeds on life. If you stand in this circle, it will take you too." She shook her head, stepping closer. "Then let it. I won't watch you destroy yourself while I live knowing I could have stopped it." The mark on her hand, the sigil that bound their souls, began to glow fiercely, reacting to her defiance. The air hummed as their energies intertwined, silver and black, light and shadow merging like two halves of a storm. Draven's voice broke. "You'll die." Selene smiled through her tears. "Then I'll die knowing I chose love over fear." He stared at her, frozen by the truth in her words. For centuries, he had ruled through fear, of death, of loss, of love itself. But now, standing before him, Selene had become everything his darkness could never consume. Slowly, he lowered his hands. The runes around them flickered and dimmed. "You defy me even in the end," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Selene reached for his hand. "Not defiance," she whispered. "Faith." Their fingers touched, and the circle ignited, not with destruction, but with rebirth. Outside, the thunder silenced. Inside, light and darkness united in one blinding surge, rewriting the fate of both the cursed king and the girl who refused to abandon him. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Selene and Draven stood hand in hand at the heart of the collapsing fortress. The air crackled with wild energy, his shadows spiraling upward like black fire, her moonlight descending in waves of silver radiance. "Let it flow through you," Draven shouted over the howling wind, his voice deep and commanding. Selene's eyes gleamed, glowing brighter than ever before. "Not through me," she replied, her voice fierce and steady. "Through us." Their powers collided, not in conflict, but in harmony. Shadow met moonfire, night met light. The dark storm above bent, twisted, and exploded into brilliance. The soldiers outside the gates fell to their knees as the sky itself split open, black and silver swirling together, forming a radiant storm that illuminated the kingdom for miles. Every spell, every curse, every chain of darkness that had bound the land began to unravel. The symbols etched into Draven's chest, marks of eternal torment, shimmered and broke apart like shards of glass. "Selene," he cried as his power surged uncontrollably, threatening to consume them both. But Selene held tighter, tears streaming down her face, her voice filled with fierce love. "I'm not letting go. We end this. Together." The storm reached its peak, a deafening roar of light and shadow merging into one. And then, in a single heartbeat, everything went silent. Where the darkness once ruled, there was now only light, soft, silver, and eternal. The storm faded, leaving a silence so deep it felt sacred. The air still shimmered faintly with the remnants of moonfire, drifting like silver dust through the ruined hall. Selene blinked, dazed and trembling, her body weak from the surge of power. Across from her, Draven knelt on the cold stone floor, smoke curling from his hands where the darkness had burned away. For the first time in centuries, he looked alive. The black veins that once crawled up his neck were gone. His crimson eyes, once the mark of the cursed, softened into a deep, human gray. And then, faint but undeniable, a heartbeat echoed in his chest. Thump! It startled him. He placed a trembling hand over his heart, eyes wide in disbelief. This can't be, he whispered hoarsely. I feel it. Warmth. Selene's lips curved into a weak smile, tears glittering in her eyes. Your curse is broken, Draven. The darkness is gone. He looked up at her, the fierce sorcerer now vulnerable, almost boyish in his awe. Slowly he rose to his feet and reached for her hand. His touch was no longer cold. It was warm, steady, and alive. You freed me, he murmured. No magic, no spell, only you. Selene shook her head softly. We freed each other. Outside, dawn broke over the horizon, the first true sunrise the kingdom had seen in centuries, and with it came the promise of redemption. Morning light spilled over the once forsaken land, touching every tower, forest, and village with gentle warmth. Where shadows had long reigned, flowers now pushed through the earth, and rivers that once ran black shimmered like liquid glass. The people emerged cautiously from their homes, expecting ruin, but instead, they saw peace. The storm was gone, the skies were clear, and above the dark mountains, the Sorcerer King's fortress stood tall, no longer cloaked in shadow, but glowing with faint silver radiance. Word spread swiftly. The Dark King lives, but the curse is ended. When Draven and Selene appeared before the people, he robed in gray and silver instead of black, she crowned with moonlight. They did not bow in fear. They knelt in respect. Under their shared rule, the kingdom found balance. Magic was no longer hunted, nor was it worshipped. The schools reopened to teach harmony between power and heart, light and darkness. Selene became the keeper of the moonfire, guiding those born with gifts once feared. Draven, now mortal yet wise, ruled with patience, a man who had walked through shadow and found redemption in love. Together they rebuilt a world where fear no longer chained the soul, and where even darkness served the light. In the grand hall, the moonlight streamed through shattered stained glass, scattering silver across the marble floor. The kingdom had gathered outside in quiet reverence, unaware of the intimate moment unfolding within the heart of the fortress. Selene stood at the center, her once tattered servant robes now replaced with flowing white and silver, the sigil on her hand glowing softly. The bond that had once enslaved her now pulsed with warmth, not of control, but of connection. Draven, stripped of his immortal darkness, approached her slowly. The proud, feared Sorcerer King, the man who once commanded storms and shadows, now knelt before her. His black cloak brushed the ground as he bowed his head, the faintest tremor in his voice breaking centuries of pride. You were never my servant, he whispered, his eyes lifting to meet hers, shining with a fragile humanity she had fought to restore. You were my salvation. Tears shimmered in Selene's eyes as she reached for him, her fingers tracing the line of his cheek. The mark on her palm glowed, merging their light one last time. Outside, the crowd saw only the brilliance rising from the tower, a burst of silver and gold that crowned the dawn. And thus, the tale of the servant of the Dark Sorcerer King became legend, of a girl who hid her power to survive, only to use it to heal the very darkness that sought to enslave her. Where there was shadow, she brought light. Where there was despair, she became hope. And where there was once a king of darkness, there stood a man redeemed by love.